importance of the study. And finally, we will close with a Q&A session and an open discussion. You can share your questions through Q&A, through the Q&A app, and then we will share them at the end of the webinar. Well, your questions and comments are all welcome. And without further ado, we can start our webinar with Waldo Tapia's remarks. Thank you for being here, Waldo Tapia. The floor is yours. Good morning. Welcome to a new webinar by PLAC. It's a pleasure to see all of you here. My name is Waldo Tapia, and I'm the lead specialist and principal coordinator of the PLAC Network. It is a pleasure to introduce this session as well as our speaker, Edgar Robles. First, let me share some words about our work and how this webinar is framed in the work that we are carrying out daily at the IDB, and then I will introduce our guest speaker. Our work is part of the division of the Social Protection and Labor Markets Division of the Inter-American Development Bank, and our mission is to support countries in Latin America and the Caribbean in their efforts to build more robust investment systems as well as more sustainable and inclusive. In order to reach these objectives, in 2015, the IDB created the PLAC Network, PLAC. This is a regional public good which serves as a learning platform between experts in the region, guarantees sustainability of social systems in the region, social security systems in the region is key given the accelerated aging process in the region. Those over 60 years old will represent one of the largest shares of the total population very soon. Through PLAC, the IDB has been a strategic partner for countries in the region in the promotion of best international practices in order to promote more inclusive and sustainable pension systems. Our vision is to provide technical assistance and exchange knowledge and to bring together policy formulators, supervisors, as well as legislators and experts. We have a very large agenda. We believe the IDB is a technical ally. This webinar, today's webinar, is not an isolated event, but rather a key element of our strategy for 2026. Through this encounter, we will address pension systems as a pillar, a critical pillar to guarantee that pensions are financially viable in the region. The technical note that we are presenting today has detailed information about best practices for social security institutions in Latin America and the Caribbean. The document highlights the accelerated aging process in the region and how viability of pension systems is an imperative. They need to professionalize pension systems in the region. For that, strengthening institutional governance, defining clear investment objectives, and have specialized staff is key in order to improve the systems. Likewise, the document talks about the importance of diversifying the portfolio as well as investments as pillars to guarantee the sustainability of the pension systems. The document talks about an efficient management of the pension systems and to guarantee the regulatory frameworks guarantee access to the right type of investments. The document is a strategic manual for those responsible of public policies and managers of funds to transform investments management into a key tool for financial sustainability and resilience of the pension systems. The note of which I am a co-author, will be presented by Edgar Robles. He is a Costa Rican economist with a postgraduate degree from the University of California in Los Angeles. He is a professor in the School of Economics in Costa Rica. He has more than 25 years of experience, and he has served in key positions in Costa Rica, Vice Minister of Finance and advisor to the president in economic issues. As an international consultant, he has worked in the reform of pension systems of more than 15 countries in the region, as well as in Europe. And he's the author of many publications on this subject matter. And he has also been a lecturer in more than 35 countries. He has led in different types of initiatives, and he's played a key role in terms of social security related matters. Now, without further ado, I will offer him the floor. I would like to first thank you, the more than 200 people that we have today connected to this webinar. Thank you, Edgar. The floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you to the bank for the opportunity to present this study that we have carried out jointly. Andrés Rosario, Waldo Tapia, myself, and others. It is an effort that took us about 10 years, not so much writing the document, but 10 years of work offering consultancy services to different countries in the region. And the document compiles of the experience that we have gathered throughout these 10 years. The study focuses on social security institutions and on investments governance. However, many of the topics that we will address here today and that are presented through the study also applies to individual situations, because the rules change many times, the deadlines change, the objectives of the fund may change, but in terms of investments, governance is very similar. Therefore, this will also be useful as an input for organizations that manage pensions in the different countries in the region. And we need to remember that not all countries have an oversight over the pension systems. Therefore, these type of norms that we are presenting will help them to improve governance in order to manage the investment portfolio in a more rigorous manner with better return. One of the main characteristics of the collective capitalization systems or pension systems in the region is that they are based on pay-as-you-go schemes, but they're not purely pay-as-you-go schemes, because when it's purely like that, they take all the payments and they're used for the payment of pensions, but there's no reserve to pay what's lacking between the contributions and the benefits. Therefore, some of them have partial pay-as-you-go schemes. In other words, they manage a small fund, and from a formal standpoint, it is used as a reserve to make adjustments, later adjustments, based on the demographic conditions as they change, and as well as expenses of the pension fund change. In this regard, what we are talking about in the note are the main objectives made by the social security institutions. These risks that you see in the management of investments of pension funds. And we also provide practical advice to strengthen these systems. This will allow us to improve the sustainability of the pension funds, but also to present reforms that are more in line with other objectives, such as increase coverage and improve the sustainability or the sufficiency of the benefits, rather. Another main characteristic of social security systems in the region is that they not only manage pensions, many of them, they also manage health services. So we're talking about active, they cover active workers as well as pensioners and contributors to the fund. So many times, boards of directors, also take care of this. And the experience of managing health funds or pension funds is very different. What we see in other regions is that they manage significant volumes of pension savings that can have a macroeconomic and fiscal impact. So it goes beyond pensions, and if this is not well managed, it could also hurt fiscal sustainability in many countries. So what is the importance of investment management? As I said, they directly contribute to the sustainability of pension systems, and in turn, it determines the future level of benefits for members and pensioners. So as these resources are better managed, we are guaranteeing more sustainability in the future, and that also allows us to manage the risks related to financial, actuarial, and liquidity risks. And it is for this reason that pension funds were created, also because of the aging population. Now, what common problems do we find in the region in terms of pension savings? First of all, we find growing financial pressures on the systems, and this has to do with demographic issues. The population is aging. In the region, many countries are undergoing full transition to older systems. Other countries are a little bit behind in demographic terms, but we will all reach the same point in 20 years. The image of the population in the region is going to be very different to the one that we have today. And practically all countries in Latin America will have transitioned to populations that are more aged, and where the elder will represent those over 65 years old will represent a large portion of the population. So we also find high concentration and low diversification of portfolios. Many times we hear that those portfolios are conservative, but that is the wrong term, because when you're conservative, it means that what you're doing is diminishing risks. And when you have a highly concentrated portfolio and not very diversified, there is high concentration risk, and that is not a conservative strategy. When we talk about conservative approaches, we're talking about investment mainly in bonds.
So we also see very weak institutional frameworks and unclear roles. So what we call the three lines of defense in terms of financial regulation are completely mixed together. We'll talk about this later. And we have limited technical capabilities for investment and not enough or scarce risk management, as well as no specialized supervision. As you'll see later, pension funds are usually supervised by the Office of the Comptroller General, which simply verifies that rules are complied with, but there is no oversight of the management of such portfolios. So specialized supervision adds value in areas that have nothing to do with compliance of rules that apply to public sector agencies, and where there are specific fund managers, pension fund managers, they're in certain countries, they're not even supervised at all by the state. Let's talk about the 15 most common mistakes in pension fund investment management in our region. As I was saying, most countries, some of the countries have more, some of them have fewer, but none of them maybe make all 15 mistakes. And this applies to both public and private sector entities. First of all, there is a lack of technical qualification in the boards of directors of these agencies. Sometimes they're called councils, sometimes they're called boards of directors, but they're the ones in charge of managing the institutions or strategy and managing also the pension fund. So more often than not, what we see in the laws of the region are requirements, honorability, so to speak, being honest. These are basic requirements that need to be fulfilled by members, but there is a lack of requirements for them to be qualified in terms of having academic degrees, experience in finance, investment, actuarial work, risk management, and that is usually carried out by agent that's happens more often than not in agencies that are also in charge of the healthcare system. And we'll talk about that combination in a moment. And this lack of experience and investment means that they are fearful of investing in investment instruments that would be beneficial to the fund, mean something that goes against the interests of the fund, which is managing a portfolio with the correct risk to benefit ratio, thinking with the future in mind. And that's what I'm going to say. The main goal of a pension fund is to pay pensions. If along the way we're able to meet certain objectives, I mean, they need to come second to the main goal, which is to pay for those pensions. And because they're not qualified, there is a constraint on such informed decisions, and therefore there is less profitability in those funds. They don't have as many returns. Then, deficient decision making. So what we see is that upper management or the CEO or the executive president, who usually sits on the board of directors, which is not a good idea. There must be a separation between the executive and upper management. They need one thing is setting the guidelines and the plan for the agency, and a different thing is actually managing it. Being in charge of operations. And so what we find is inverted investment schemes. So in terms of governance, the major strategic decisions must come from a smaller board of directors, and that means that there should be technical decisions made, and orders should be given to management. But the decision-making pyramid is upside down. We have certain decisions and instructions being provided, or input being provided to the board of directors by managers or technical staff who are not well qualified to do that. Because those in upper management are not well versed in portfolio management, and let alone pension management, they end up delegating those decisions in those executives. So upper management is actually includes part of those in charge of the daily operations, and they end up with people who should not be sitting on the board. So this general manager or CEO, who usually wear several hats, and so they work with healthcare insurance, with administration, procurement, and medication procurement, making financial and investment decisions, where there are also, to boot, the risk of decisions being politically based. So the decisions are made with the funds from the Ministry of Finance that do not benefit pension funds, or pension funds end up becoming a source of liquidity for investments and for fiscal investments. So this leads to a third problem, which are gaps in corporate governance. And one of the major shortcomings across the organization is that there is no well-defined risk management policy, or even an investment policy that is well-defined. So you end up with an agency with an investment policy that is not well-defined. It should contain an annual investment plan and a strategic investment allocation plan as well. So oftentimes what happens in the various rules of procedure or statutes of the various Social Security administrations is that they have a checklist, and with arbitrary weight factors that lead nowhere. So what they do is just assuage staff members, whereby they feel backed by it, meaning we procured certain things or we bought certain things according to this checklist with a certain qualification, verification, but that does not meet any risk parameters, or the decisions that might not be the best decision, and based on the rating of these instruments. Also, technological tools are not well used. They usually use an Excel spreadsheet. All they have is the date of purchase. So when the coupon maturity, and basically oftentimes some of the information is lost, and so instead of investing their time in risk management, they end up using all of their time, or wasting it, on filling out Excel spreadsheets, or using the technological tools that are not the best, and that leads to bad decisions about investment. So when it comes to governance, we also have incomplete definition of or setting of responsibilities. Senior management takes on personal risk. I would not feel comfortable sitting on any of those boards, or being the CEO of any of these institutions, because I'd have to take decisions, and I would be held personally liable for those. Those are not documented. They're not based on risk management plans, and their decisions also about the yield of these investments. They are not backed by anything, those decisions, so they may go wrong. There's confusion about decisions and the roles. There is a mix of people, areas are making decisions about investment, and that are decisions that should be in the hands of a risk management area, or vice versa. And then we have the CEO making decisions that should be in the hands, that should be up to the finance or risk management decisions. So the issue of corporate risk means that there should be somebody in charge of every role, and that should be clearly spelled out in job descriptions, in a specific manual, so that information is transparently conveyed, and people know who's responsible for what. As I also said, there is lack of independence in the technical committees. And I will tell you about what the governance of a pension fund should look like for all three lines of defense. But what we're seeing is that the technical committees that should report to the board of directors are actually report to upper management. And that creates conflicts of interest because it is upper management that makes investment decisions, and those who provide the input to inform those decisions are report to them. So that may lead to the materialization of political risks that may lead to bad decisions or to a decision being made to invest in certain assets that are not the most profitable because they're based on a vested political interests or may benefit certain economic activities or sectors that will not necessarily fulfill the main goal of pension funds, to wit, paying pensions. And that's seen throughout the organization. So what we need is independence so as to have an independent upper management and institute those controls that will allow for a better decision-making structure. Yet another common feature and mistake, which are some of the worst that we see, is that many of these agencies are self-regulated. So even, and that's even under the Constitution, that means that they issue their own they write their own rules of procedure without any oversight. That leads to very lax regulation, conflicts of interest, and these are state agencies that are overseen by a comptroller general or or something to that effect. And the type of oversight carried out by a comptroller general is similar to that of an external auditor, meaning compliance with rules, etc., but they don't go into the management of funds proper. So when there is specialized oversight, there are specific agencies that need to set rules that must be complied with according to international best practices, but also throughout the region, as we've seen in countries where we have pension regulators, what we see is risk-based supervision, which the idea is not just to obtain profitability, but rather profitability and yield that meets certain risk parameters. So instead of just looking for profitability, there must be a policy to make those decisions based on risk. And that decision management, the risk management decisions are made by the boards of directors. So if based off that risk, I want a specific level of profitability, of yield, then what I have to see is whether the portfolio can be structured in such a way that that can be attained based on that risk management policy. And I'm saying this because certain countries in the region set a profitability threshold, and that cannot be attained without a certain level of risk being taken. So risk needs to be set first. And without that in the region, who can guarantee that we're not taking on unduly high risk in order to attain that profitability level? And that's done through regulation. And for those countries with risk-based supervision, the requirements will have been set for risk levels to be taken on, and that's the way it's done. So the main principle here at play for a pension fund is to guarantee a certain replacement rate. So what percentage of salary can be paid out by the system to retirees or to pensioners? So as part of this scheme, we see a lack of institutional capacity and lack of procedures. There are no risk manuals. Some of them are just investment manuals. There are no minutes of the decisions that are made with traceability to who said what, and there's a lack of strategy. There's confusion between strategic and operational roles. There should be a separation of those two roles, as I said before. Yet another major point that we've talked about at length throughout the region is that with the decline over time in the return on investments, many Social Security administrations have fled to loans in seeking yield or profitability. That's not a mistake per se. What is the problem is the risks and not being aware of what they are with that strategy. So many of them are not based on loan regulation. So there's a great deal of discretion. Also, administrative expenditures linked to those loans are not factored in when estimating net returns. So on other occasions, what we see is that Social Security Administration agencies have no access to the credit bureau, so there is an adverse or a reversed decision-making system, because oftentimes these players go to the Social Security Administration to get loans, and the Social Security Administration in turn has no way of checking what their credit score is. So there you go. You get people who are not creditworthy or getting loans, and also these funds are not authorized to issue loans. So the pension funds should be there to manage pensions and pay pension funds and pay out pensions. That's one thing. And then they invest in activities that are completely foreign to what they do, for example, pasture lands. So if we have problems with these boards of directors, which oftentimes have to also manage the healthcare system, imagine if on top of that they have to manage real estate investments such as buildings, herds of cattle, pharmacies, pasture lands, and many other activities where they have no idea of the risks that they're taking on, and that don't necessarily contribute to a higher return.
The investment risk yields a low return and goes against the interest of the contributors. So many times we hear we need the pension funds to invest in infrastructure. But if we're going to invest in infrastructure, we need to know that that's a higher risk than investing in other types of financial assets. Therefore, we need to know if they have a higher return and if that justifies the risk appetite by the senior management. But here we have no definition for risk appetite. We don't have a tool to assess those assets, and we don't know the risk linked to those assets, and that will lead to some of the most common errors that we have identified. In more extreme cases, there is lack of separation of pension funds and health funds. It's not very common, but what it is very common is for both funds to be managed identically, in the same way. In other words, the same people intervene to define the investment strategy in both funds. They use the same parameters. Therefore, they don't have any risk parameters, and in many cases, the rich brother is the one that has the pension fund, and that one lends money to the poor brother, which is the health fund, because they don't have a reserve to invest. Like the pension fund. Therefore, given the lack of liquidity of the health fund, or if they have some investments that are liquid, they transfer those titles in conditions are not good for the pension fund, and that way they affect the sustainability of the pension fund. Why? Because for a manager of a health fund, it's more immediate to address health needs than pension needs, especially for a region that is in the process of getting older, such as the one in Latin America. So health is more immediate, pensions are less, and that the crossing of subsidies there is not controlled. And sometimes we find that type of crossing within subsystems of the system. Therefore, we have pension systems that manage individual and collective accounts. Given the lack of funding in the collective fund because of lack of liquidity, they transfer funds from one place to another in order to gain liquidity in the fund that doesn't have any, in a way that many times is not very transparent. So this leads to sustainability issues that affects the primary objective of the pension fund. The next problem is failure to value, to have value at market prices. So this is not an element only for individual capitalization systems. This type of issue is necessary in order to manage risk. If I don't have market prices, I cannot manage risk because the main financial risks are market risks. Change in the price of shares, for example, and if I don't do this at market price, how am I going to assess risks? There is an incentive then to leave those assets that have incurred losses or have less value within the portfolio, not to visualize those losses within the fund. And that is a very serious conflict of interest and has led to political risks that have been materialized. And it also affects the financial results. When I talk about the return of a public pension fund, I cannot compare that directly with the return of a private pension fund because one is at market value and the other one is not. Therefore, there is no transparency in the dissemination of financial information because the norms are subjective and not objective, as they should. And this has to do with the discussion of whether I can value an instrument at a historic cost or not, if I use the international accounting standards or not. But here we're not talking about that. In many cases, the way you invest or the way these social security institutions invest are short-term certificates that are not subject to this type of assessment. And this lack of assessment leads to a hindered decision-making process. This lack of valuation. Investment strategies are conservative, and I'm saying this in quotation marks, ultra-conservative, but the definition here of conservative is wrong because we have high concentration on national bonds, high concentration in domestic in bonds, in domestic bonds, and that exposes the pension fund to specific risks. Why? Why is this type of investment done? This ultra-conservative investment, in quotation marks, done. It has to do with political risk, where the pension fund is used to fund other institutions. It has to do with lack of expertise, given the fear of having sure may declare bankruptcy because bankruptcy because of the lack of risk assessment. For example, it could lead to a state to go bankrupt. So what we see here is lack of expertise, lack of knowledge, and that basically leads to a lack of return. Here we already talked about this a little bit. There's no formal analysis of the risks. The risk of the instruments is not measured. We talked about the loans or the investments in real estate. It also applies here. If there's no risk assessment, if there's no rigorous risk assessment based on probability and well-known models, that is a lack of a comprehensive approach that will not allow us to manage a portfolio in such a way so that we can optimize risk and return. The other issue is the mismatch of assets and liabilities. Many times, governments use investment securities or bonds in the short term. Markets are very liquid in our countries, and those funds many times have low return, and we have a liquidity risk. This is manifested in different ways. One, to invest in very long term when the need of the fund are much more short term. That forces me to have to sell a long-term security in order to have liquidity. Since the markets are not very deep, what is going to happen is for those bonds to be, they will lose value, and that leads to liquidity issues. And the other problem with liquidity is when I don't find instruments in the right term. I have to invest in the short term in public or private entities, but in very short term, sometimes 1, 2, or even 5 years in the best case scenario. And that forces me to be subject to what the market is offering me at that point. The frequency of the investment, the turnover of the portfolio sometimes is very high, and that has a cost that is much more elevated in terms of versatility, and it's subject to the volatility of the market and risks of the market that I should not have to face if I have better management of our investments, a more liberal type of management, and that has an impact on sustainability. Specialized regulators. Here, the oversight is in charge of the Controller's Office, and sometimes there is lack of technical knowledge by this entity, specifically when it comes to pensions. Therefore, we need an agency that is specialized in pensions in order to manage this type of fund. And finally, we see lack of internal audit independence. Sometimes it reports to senior management, there are conflicts of interest, and it weakens internal control. Now, all these flaws have a single consequence of result, and it's that we have lower risk-adjusted returns and loss of savings value. That goes against sustainability of the pension funds. It creates greater exposure to financial, fiscal, and concentration risks. Portfolios are more removed from efficient allocations.
Produce un monto esperado de las pensiones mucho menor y mayor presión sobre recursos públicos hacia futuro y cada vez más hacia
we see lower expected pension amounts and increased pressure on public resources. So they require greater flows from the ministry in order to be able to pay the pensions that need to be disbursed. Now, what is the structure? The details are in the document, by the way, but what is the ideal governance structure for pension fund investments based on modern regulations and most widely accepted principles in this subject matter. Well, first we need decision-making structures with the board of directors, as well as the committees that support the board of directors, the risk committees and investment committee. The risk committee includes many times one that deals with compliance and covers also everything that has to do with regulations. That's on the strategic side, and it's linked to the general management, which is the liaison between the strategic part and the operational one. What is the operational part? Well, it has an area that deals with investments, and that is managed by the investment committee, and management here can be part of it. And then you have a risk division that depends on the risk committee, and in terms of daily operations, they are the ones in charge of managing the pension fund, the marketability of the pension fund. The rules are based on the inputs by the committee, the risk and investment committees. With those inputs, they will develop the necessary policies to manage the fund. With all these norms in place, which are suggested by the risk and investments committees that depend on the different divisions that are providing inputs in order to coordinate all this and be able to carry out their work with specific policies in place, there will be constant communication between the risk division and the investment division, and all that with the management overseeing all this. But we have to separate the risk, the strategic part from the day-to-day operations part. The one that defines the instruments on which investments are going to be made is an investment committee that will be confirmed by a risk committee to make sure that it complies with all the norms in place, and that will give instructions to the investment area to invest with the parameters that have been established. And the risk area is overseeing the investment division continuously, and there are internal controls all the time. Checks and balances. The first defense area is basically the risk division. The second one, the first one is the investment division, rather, whose representative is the general management, and the second one is the risk division, and then in the internal checks that they have. And this is much more detailed in the document that we provided. Now, what do we recommend? First, clear separation between strategic and operational functions. That's key. It's important to have a pyramid for the decision-making process, from the most general aspects that are at the bottom to the more specific ones at the top, which is going to be senior management. The second point is to create investment and risk committees, in other words, technical committees as advisory bodies to the management body. They will report basically to management. Then it's important to have smooth interaction between committees and senior management, to have defined manual of functions and responsibilities. It's important that everyone knows their role and the responsibility, and also we need to avoid duplication of roles. On all these will improve governance. Now, with regard to the investment committee, I was talking about integration. It's important to have experts on investments and finance, to have external members too, if the law allows for it. You have to remember that the investment committee is an advisory committee, basically. It advises management. It has to evaluate and assess investment proposals from
y requiere
the
independencia y
investment
autonomía
division, and
funcional.
it
O
must
sea,
have
el
independence and
objetivo es
functional
que
autonomy. Therefore, the
se
objective
defina para
here
aprobación
is
del
to
órgano de dirección para
define
inversiones una asignación
a
estratégica de inversiones con base en una
strategy,
política de
investment
inversiones que
strategy
es fijada
based
por el
on an
órgano de
investment
dirección.
policy established by
Muy bien.
management.
Luego, en cuanto a riesgos,
Now,
bueno, el
regarding
encargado de
risks,
riesgos debe identificar y evaluar los riesgos
those
financieros.
responsible for risk
Tiene que
have to
contar con
identify
especialistas
and
en riesgos.
assess
Esto
financial risk. Therefore, you
más
need
que un tema
experts on
financiero,
risks.
que es
More than a
necesario,
financial
aquí es
matter,
un tema también de
here it's
organización
more
industrial.
about
Pues va a
industrial
definir los límites y
organization.
políticas de
Therefore,
riesgo para que sean
those
aprobados por
experts
el órgano
need
de
to
dirección
define
y
risk policies to be
va
approved
a
by
colaborar con el
management,
comité de
and they will work
inversiones,
together
además
with the
de que va a
investment
servir como
committee.
segunda línea de
And they
defensa
will be the second line of
de la
defense
gobernanza de las inversiones.
in terms of investment governance.
Y la interacción que debe existir entre los comités y la alta dirección es
And
que
then there
esos
must be
comités en
interaction
primera
between
instancia
committees and senior
reportan
management.
directamente
The
a la junta
committees must
directiva.
report directly
Eso quiere decir que
to
la
the
alta dirección no
management
debe
body.
presidir ninguno de estos
Senior
comités.
management
O sea,
should not
no
chair,
va a haber una
therefore, any
relación
of these technical
de
committees,
dependencia,
because otherwise
¿verdad?
there would be
No puede sentirse
or
jefe
rather,
el gerente
the manager cannot be
dentro de esos órganos. Eso evita
also
conflictos de interés y
part
concentración
of
de
the
poder.
technical
Y
committees. That way you
además
avoid
fomenta
conflicts of
decisiones clínicamente
interest.
objetivas. O sea, si
And
el
it also
órgano de
promotes
dirección, si la junta
technical and
directiva tiene una
objective
opinión
technical
sesgada de la
decisions.
forma en la cual está
So if the
controlando las
manager
activas
has
y
a
riesgos,
biased
va a tener
opinion
mucha
on
más confianza,
how
va a evitar los
the
conflictos de
risk
interés y
division
en lugar
is
de tener
performing, they will
un
have
director ejecutivo o un
a
presidente
conflict
ejecutivo
of
o un
interest. You
gerente
need
que no
a
solamente preside
CEO or a
los comités técnicos,
manager
sino también es parte de la junta directiva. Eso lo que hace
that
es
is
que
only
diluir
part of the
la
board
toma
of
de
directors.
responsabilidades
That way you dilute the
o
decision-making
o la definición
process
de responsabilidades para evitar el surgimiento de conflictos de
in
interés.
order to avoid such conflicts of interest that I mentioned.
Y bueno, aquí para resumir esto, lo que tenemos
And
es
here,
un
as a
sistema
summary,
de
what we
gobernanza
have
que se
is
basa en
a
las tres líneas de
governance
defensa
system
definidas
based
por el Banco Internacional de Pagos, o
on
sea, Basilea,
the
que si bien fue creado para
Basel
bancos,
Committee's
esto es
governance
aplicado para
principles
todas las áreas del sector financiero e
adapted to
incluso fuera
pension
del
fund
sector financiero.
management. This is
Las tres
used
líneas de defensa
for
tienen
the
que estar
financial
segregadas
system
y
as well
claramente
as
definidas y
also the
dependientes.
things that don't have
Una
to do
es
with
la
the
línea de
financial system.
inversiones,
You need
que implementa controles y
different
reporta
lines of
incidentes.
defense. The
Una
first
segunda
one is the
línea que es
investment
la línea de
unit that
riesgos,
implements
que
controls and
monitora el
reports
cumplimiento de la política de
incidents. The
riesgo
second
que
line
fue
is
creado
the
por la
risk
junta
unit that
directiva y
monitors
establece controles
compliance with
internos. Y la tercera línea de
risk
defensa
appetite and
es la
internal
auditoría
controls. And the
interna
third
que
line is the
provee una
internal
gobernanza,
audit
supervisión y
that
cumplimiento de la ley,
evaluates
además de
governance,
vigilar que la
reporting, and
segunda y
legal
primera línea de defensa
compliance,
estén
and make
funcionando
sure that
de
the
forma
first and
correcta.
second defense
Cada línea
lines
de
are
defensa tiene sus
properly
funciones y
working.
una autonomía
Each line
determinada.
has defined
Y
functions
es
and
muy difícil,
autonomy, and
es
it
posible,
is
pero es muy
very difficult.
difícil
It's possible,
que se
but it's
rompan las tres
very
líneas de defensa.
difficult
O sea, el objetivo de todo
for
esto es
the three
justamente evitar
defense
que
lines to
haya
fail.
una
So
ruptura al
here the
vínculo entre
point
todas las
is to
líneas
make
y eso la
sure
independencia
that you
adecuada es algo muy
avoid the
difícil
failure of the
que no
three
se cumpla
lines.
y una va a reportar a la o sea, una va a
And
verificar
one
a la
will
otra y la última a la
oversee
segunda.
the next one and the next one, and so on and so forth.
Bueno, entonces aquí lo que tenemos es la responsabilidad de cada línea de defensa. La primera línea de defensa, que se denomina unidad de negocio, pues asume riesgos y debe gestionarlos. Identifica, evalúa y notifica exposición según un apetito de riesgo definido y de acuerdo a los procedimientos y controles establecidos. La segunda línea de defensa, que es riesgo cumplimiento, generalmente el cumplimiento, como les digo, está junto con la de riesgo, pues complementa las actividades de riesgo en las líneas de negocio mediante seguimiento y notificación. Vigila que las actividades impidan asumir riesgos excesivos. Ya está evaluando continuamente esos riesgos. Realza, digamos, la importancia de la alta dirección y de los jefes en las líneas de negocio para la identificación y evaluación de los riesgos. Y realiza el seguimiento rutinario para el cumplimiento de la legislación en la parte normativa, especialmente en normas de gobierno corporativo, regulaciones, códigos, etcétera. Y la tercera línea de defensa, que es la auditoría interna, lo que proporciona es una revisión independiente y objetiva sobre la calidad y eficiencia del sistema de control interno. También vigila la primera y segunda línea para que estén funcionando de forma adecuada y en el marco de un gobierno del riesgo, en donde se den vínculos a la cultura organizativa, donde la parte de gestión de riesgos tiene que premiar a toda la organización y se establezcan esos lineamientos dentro de la planificación estratégica en la parte de retribución y los procesos de toma de decisiones. Ese es como el resumen de cómo operan las tres líneas de defensa. Aquí tenemos un esquema de cómo funciona el flujo de información entre un proceso y otro, entre la parte de inversiones y riesgos. Por ejemplo, inversiones inicia analizando mercados e instrumentos, luego identifica oportunidades de inversión. Cuando identifica nuevas oportunidades de inversión que no están contempladas en inversiones que ya se realizan, pues somete a riesgos la aprobación de instrumentos y emisores. Esa aprobación se da con base en metodologías y límites que ya han sido definidos por parte del órgano de dirección. Da el visto bueno para realizar inversiones según los límites aprobados y luego monitorear el cumplimiento de esos límites la parte de riesgos, comunica desviaciones y la área de inversiones toma decisiones preventivas y correctivas para nuevamente realizar inversiones y se establece ese círculo virtuoso en donde las inversiones continuamente son, digamos, eh, revisadas por la parte de riesgos, que monitorea cumplimiento y límites de riesgos para comunicar desviaciones y establecer ese cambio en el portafolio a lo largo del tiempo con el cumplimiento tanto de los objetivos de riesgo como de rentabilidad.
Edgar,
We we have lost the speaker.
Edgar, ¿nos oyes?
Edgar, can you hear us?
Edgar nos está dejando en suspenso unos minutos.
So we're waiting for the speaker to come back.
Un segundito, Edgar se está,
Edgar will
conectando
need
nuevamente.
to
Por mientras, dos
reconnect
cosas. Los
to the session.
invito
I'd like to say two things
dejar
while we wait for him. Please
en la sección de preguntas y
use the
respuestas sus
Q&A
preguntas. Y lo
feature
otro,
to
que
ask your
los invito a
questions.
descargar también
And
como
I'd also
participante
like to
esta,
encourage you
esta,
to download the
esta
bank's
sección.
publication, which is in the chat.
Tienen dos
The
invitaciones.
link is in the
Descargar la
chat.
publicación
Please
y sumarse a la sesión.
download the technical note and ask your questions.
Un segundito, que Edgar se está conectando,
If you'll bear with us for a second, Edgar will be joining us
pero,
soon.
pero hasta el momento creo que
Um,
este webinar ha
I
sido
I
muy
hope that
interesante. Les
this
invito
presentation has
solo
proven
a
interesting,
dejar preguntas
and
en
I'd like
los
to encourage
comentarios en la
you
sección de preguntas y
to
respuestas. Para
write
nosotros
your
es muy
questions and
importante
also comments in the
saber
Q&A
qué están, cuáles son los
section
comentarios,
because it's
que han
important
participado
to
en el
us
evento,
to see your comments, to hear your comments. This event
otros
was
eventos de
organized in preparation for upcoming events about
Tenemos un
this
par de
issue.
minutitos.
So if you'll bear with us for a couple more minutes.
Una de las preguntas que se ha mencionado un par de veces
One of the questions that has come up more than
para
once
quienes no conocían el apoyo que da el
for
banco
those of
para
you who are not
pensiones.
aware of the support provided by the bank
El banco
in
tiene una
about
pensión, la red de
pensions,
pensiones
we have
Improvinglives,
this
que tiene
network, the
como
Latin American Caribbean Pension
objetivo
Network,
apoyar
whose
el
purpose is
fortalecimiento de
to
los sistemas de pensiones en América
provide
Latina.
support for the strengthening
Había
of
también
pension
pensé
systems in the region. And I just dropped the link for PLAC,
Y
our
disculpas con todos
network,
ustedes,
in
Edgar
the
se
chat.
está conectando desde otro
Please
medio, tuvo un problema técnico, pero
accept our
no se preocupe, lo bueno
apologies.
ya en un
Edgar
momento
is
retomó.
reconnecting and he will be with us soon. I know that technical issues happen more often than
Además, este
not.
evento hemos tenido
And this
bastantes en este
event
evento,
has been quite
hemos
successful
tenido hasta 250
with up to
participantes. Ahora,
250 participants. attending. Thank you. Are you back? Yes. I am sorry, my computer froze, but I'm back. As I was saying, this is based on international standards, which has been sent by the OECD, IOPS, and the IDB itself, and they apply to public and private sector pension funds.
Un segundito. Ok, entonces,
as I was saying, one of such principles is the income for you to get the target pension. So you need to know how much you need to earn to be able to get a specific pension. So you need a set rate of replacement. So you need a system that is sustainable based on your retirement targets, maybe at 50% as set by the ILO as a minimum. So you need to know how much the contribution rate needs to be, how old, what the retirement age is, and also investment goals, as well as how you're going to invest to be able to pay out those benefits. So in terms of prudential regulations, you'll need the right technical parameters and actuarial projections so that you have the right strategy. We've talked about being prudent, right, and having the right people. So these have fiduciary responsibility. So all of the board members, well, what being prudent means? It means that you are going to invest the assets belonging to third parties as if they were your own, as if you were a good father. And there needs to be clear standards for fund management, including risk, liquidity, and return criteria that need to be regularly updated at least once a year, that is. As to investment limits and pricing, asset pricing, ideally, you should start departing from the limits or caps as the system matures, but you can have caps by type of instrument or issuer as long as they are maximums. You should never set floors. That's a recommendation for investment, because otherwise you would be forcing the pension fund to invest in a type of security about the return on which you're not sure about. So it also, excessive risk concentration should be avoided, and there should be transparency and informed decision making. And those are the basic principles when it comes to pension fund investment management. There should be targets for retirement, prudence, also the pricing, and those are the six principles that we just mentioned. Conclusions. Governance is, when it comes to investment, is a key determining factor for risk-adjusted returns in pension funds. Good international practices are meant to strengthen decision-making and transparency, to avoid surprises along the way, and so that people can be confident that their contributions are meeting their purpose, which were set when the pension fund was created. Clear roles and effective oversight should be established to protect members and pensioners. There should be better investment frameworks to reduce discretion, because there will be technical parameters instead of just discretionality, and unnecessary risks. And this will all lead towards a single overarching goal, which is more sustainable and appropriate pensions. And so that concludes my presentation, and we're here willing to entertain questions. Andres, I have concluded. Thank you. Edgar, thank you. This presentation gives us a great deal of food for thought and for debate, and we could spend a long time talking about many of these issues that you raised. But in the interest of time, all we have is 20 minutes. I'd like to remind everyone that we have a Q&A section. We will be selecting questions for you to answer, but just to get the ball rolling, I'd like to ask you about your experience, not only as superintendent in Costa Rica, but in terms of what you've seen throughout the region in your role as advisor. What could you pinpoint to 2 or 3 specific changes to decision making, to investment decision making and governance that will have an impact? And for countries that are beginning to walk along this path, down this path, if you were to create a roadmap, where should they start with the regulatory framework, investment committees, investment plans? Just based on your experience, what changes can be made first, and what are the main changes to be made? So that's a good question. And this document might be a bit overwhelming to some people who are trying to fine-tune their pension systems, because many things have been done. And it's a good thing to set priorities when starting off with reforms. It's very difficult to make a recommendation. This is not a one-size-fits-all solution, as you know. It's very specific to each country and to its own institutional framework. But the critical issue here is that there should be a separation of roles between the strategic and the operational sides. So that's the point of departure. But to do that, we need to have the right technical staff. That means putting together a team with sufficient experience and technical expertise to provide the decision-making body with the inputs for it to make decisions on policy. But this separation that I just mentioned between strategy and operations is key, because it enables people to see those political risks that have had a negative impact on returns in the past. And that can be done even in the absence of a specialized regulator. If agencies self-regulate within that framework, those principles can be met that I just listed this morning. But if the country decides that that it does not have the ability to self-regulate, I believe that the best idea would be to create regulations, and that a regulator be created to force agencies to walk down that path, so that there be some minimum elements to make sure that that independence is there. So thank you. I'm going to read some of the questions from participants. There are 2 issues having to do with investment and risk, which I feel are very important, and I'll read a question. And let me see. The first question from Jonathan Sevilla is about investment policy. What are the main elements of an investment policy for it to be complete, comprehensive, and appropriate? And what metrics should be used to assess performance and risk in portfolios? That's a good question.
Pero la política de inversiones los que establece son
Investment
los parámetros mínimos que tiene que seguir
policies set the minimum
los
parameters
instrumentos en los cuales
to
se
be
invierten.
met
O sea, en primera
when a decision
instancia,
is made about
se tiene que establecer, por
instruments to
ejemplo,
be where
qué
investments
tipos de
will be allocated.
instrumentos
First of all, we need
autorizados
to
por ser
know
públicos.
what types of
Los
instruments
límites de
are
inversiones que se
authorized,
tienen que
what
establecer
the investment caps are
en cuanto a
to be
los
established
diferentes instrumentos
in terms
que se
of
utilizan.
the different risk
La
instruments.
política de inversiones también tiene que
And
incluir,
investment policies should also include
digamos, el calce de plazos. O sea,
the maturity
cómo tiene que
matches.
ser la estructura del fondo de pensiones.
So the
También podría
structure of
establecer una
the
meta
fund
de
of the
rentabilidad
pension fund.
que sumamente
There can also be a
que se está asumiendo.
return
Cuando hablamos de esa
target,
meta de
bearing in
rentabilidad,
mind the risk
muchas
being
veces las
taken
políticas de
on.
inversión
So in terms of
incluyen
that target
la definición de un fondo de
about
referencia
returns,
o
there
benchmark
oftentimes there
para
is a
medir,
benchmark portfolio that is
nuestro
used
desempeño contra
to
esos factores de benchmark.
as a
La
yardstick
construcción de un portafolio
to
benchmark no
assess
significa que vamos a
a
copiar ese
benchmark portfolio.
portafolio,
That doesn't
sino
mean
que
that you're
primero
going
se
to
va a hacer
strictly
comparado con ese
emulate
portafolio
that
para
portfolio,
medir
so that your
la
structure
efectividad
will
de
use
las
that as a
diferentes áreas que
benchmark
están
to assess the effectiveness of the different areas involved
en institución a obtener una rentabilidad determinada.
in the
Sí, o sea,
pursuit of a specific level of
el
return.
documento
So
establece
this
los
document
componentes
should
que se tienen que
include the
incluir en una
minimum
política de inversiones
components
o
to
se
be
da la
included
referencia
in
en
a
donde
an
enumeremos
investment
requisitos de
policy, and using
OECD o el
benchmarks
mismo BID
such
para
as
ver
the
cuáles son
principles
los
of the
elementos mínimos
OECD
que
or
tiene que
even
ver
the
esa
IDB,
política de inversiones.
where
En
those
cuanto a
are
la política
spelled
de
out.
riesgos,
As
es
to
algo
the risk
parecido, o sea,
policy, well, the situation is
hay
similar.
una serie de
There
modelos
are
de
several
gestión de riesgos
models
y el
for
documento
risk
establece los
management
riesgos mínimos, está
available,
fijado, digamos,
and
por
this
espacio de
document
tiempo, pero
should
establece
set the
los
minimum
riesgos
risks
mínimos que tienen que vigilarse en un fondo de pensiones,
that
porque los riesgos
need to be
sociofinancieros, riesgos operativos,
monitored. We're talking about
etcétera,
financial,
riesgos
operational
tecnológicos,
risks, technological
riesgos de
risks,
gobernanza, a los cuales se
governance
establece
risks
una
that
área de
need to be
riesgos,
watched.
no solamente de riesgos de
The
inversiones.
risk area does
Dentro del
not only
documento de
concern
resultados
itself
estamos viendo
with
ahora parte de
investment risks.
inversiones,
It,
pero el área de
in our
riesgos
presentation, we
de
focused on
otros
investment,
riesgos que puedan
but the
afectar
risk area
el
is
funcionamiento de la
also
entidad.
works with
Y
other
si vamos
types
más
of
allá en
risks
la
that
parte de
may have an
riesgo de
impact
continuidad de
on the
negocio,
operation.
riesgo de
So of the
reputacional,
entities such as business continuity,
riesgo
reputational risk,
de fraudes, en fin,
fraud
una
risk.
cantidad enorme de
So
riesgos que se tienen que
there
establecer
are a
casi a nivel
plethora
de
of
cada una
risks
de las
that there is a plethora of risks that
instituciones.
needs to be
Entonces, esto tiene
set for
de
each
planificación
situation and
de
each
planificación
agency. So
estratégica
this
que va
stems
definiendo
from
cuáles son los
strategic
riesgos actuales
planning
que
that
debería tener
sets
una
the
institución que se
risks
basa en
that
una
need
definición de
more
mapa de riesgos que
attention,
hay que
which
definir
is
de
based
una mapa de calor,
on
los
risk
riesgos, o sea,
maps,
cuál es el riesgo
which in turn are
riesgos
based on heat
institucionales
maps
y actuarial
for
en un
each
enfoque
agency and how likely they are of actually materializing
ocurrencia.
to actually
Esos mapas de
materialize.
calor se
So
establecen en
these heat
ejercicios de
maps
planificación
are
estratégica
developed through
y se da
strategic
un
planning
ciclo continuo de
exercises,
evaluación basada en
and
riesgos,
there
que es un ciclo
is
continuo para ir viendo cuáles son los
risk-based
riesgos que van a
supervision
ocurrir en el
has an
futuro.
ongoing cycle
Riesgos
for
residuales a los
risk
cuales hay que poner
supervision,
atención
and there's
y
residual
unos
risks
riesgos
that
donde
are
decisiones
established that need
esa
attention,
diferente,
and
esa diferente cantidad de riesgos que
decisions
vamos a
are
tener.
made as
Entonces,
to
la
how
respuesta
to
a la
deal with
pregunta
these
lamentablemente es
different
sí.
types of risks.
O
So
sea,
the
métricas
answer to your
existen y
question,
métricas hay muchas
unfortunately, is
cuales
not easy.
yo les
There
pueda
are metrics out there, but they
preponderancias,
will
lo cual
depend on the
depende
risk
a
that I'm
estos
going to be
instituciones en
focusing on,
particular.
and that will
Obviamente hay
depend
riesgos
on
recurrentes,
the
riesgos
institution at hand. Of
sociológicos,
course,
riesgos
there are
reputacionales,
recurring risks
riesgos
such as
tecnológicos,
business
riesgos
interruption,
operativos,
reputational, IT
determinados,
risks,
pero hay que hacer
and
un
others.
mapa
But
para
of
cada tipo
course, that will
de institución.
depend on the
Una vez hayamos
type of
definido eso,
agency.
vamos a
And
mirar las
once we've
métricas. Las
set
métricas
that,
ahí
we are
están,
going to
ya existen, se han
look at the
definido modelos
metrics.
para
There's no
esos
need to
riesgos y
reinvent the
métricas
wheel. They're out there
para
already. They have
gestionar
been
esos riesgos. Entonces,
developed. So we have to just find the
sería
right
casi
metrics to
sentarse a nivel individual
monitor
con
those risks. So you'd have to
una
basically
institución para ir
meet
definiendo esos
with, I
riesgos
would
y ir
have to
estableciendo
meet
las mejores
with
métricas y
each agency
los mejores modelos probabilísticos para medir esos riesgos.
to determine what the risks are and what the best metrics and probabilistic methods are.
We have many questions. Thank you for those that asked questions. We have 25 questions. Unfortunately, we do not have time to answer all of them, so I'm trying to select different questions about different issues in order to try to cover as many issues as possible. Diana Ruma asks a question about the following, talking about the technical capacity that is needed for senior management of pension funds. The question is, what are the specialized knowledge that we need, specialized skills that we're talking about? You mentioned some of them. International standards establish that the board of directors has to have individual and collective knowledge to manage a pension fund. Therefore, you do not have a single person with all the skills to manage a pension fund, right? What you need is collectively, you need to look the right combination of knowledge with financial skills, actuarial skills, industrial organization skills. This has to do with the establishment of processes and procedures for the organization, legal skills, and so on and so forth. And the combination of all of them in different persons will make the board of director suitable to fix the general lines based on which the policies are going to be. Now, unfortunately, the laws that created the social security institutions, many of them are from the previous century. And these laws did not establish suitability regulations, like we said during the presentation, but rather these boards were established based on population representation, basically pensioners, employers, government representatives, and these representatives do not have or do not meet any suitability requirements. Some of them have the right skills, but to be honest, collectively, they don't have the right skills. So what the international standard establishes is that in such cases, what you need to do is to provide technical support to this board of directors to help them understand the importance of making decisions based on technical criteria. In terms of specific criteria, some of them are defined in the regulations, but in general, those skills are the ones that I just mentioned. Thank you, Edgar. It was a very clear answer. Thank you to the audience for their questions. We received many. Unfortunately, time is limited. Therefore, we are going to close today's webinar right now, or the Q&A session, rather. We would like to thank Edgar for his presentation. And now I would like to offer the floor to Tapia to offer some closing remarks before we close today's webinar. I would like to highlight 3 fundamental lessons learned from today's presentation. First, the need to professionalize governance through independent committees, the importance to mitigate risks in the decision-making, and the urgency to establish a specialized oversight institution to oversee the sustainability of the fund. And I think this summarizes this excellent presentation by Edgar. I would like to thank Edgar Robles for sharing his experience and knowledge, technical knowledge. Undoubtedly, this will become a very important document for all those that are here with us today. As we have seen today, the path to more robust and inclusive pension funds includes excellent management of the assets. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we are seeing demographic changes, and therefore we need to act with rigorous transparency and technical knowledge. In the IDB, we reaffirm our commitment to continue to be a strategic partner to strengthen pension fund systems in the region. Our agenda is ambitious. Today's session is just in the beginning of an ongoing dialogue to strengthen the governance of our institutions for the benefit of our citizens. Before closing, I would like to invite all of you again to download the complete technical note via the link that we shared on the chat. Pay attention, we will have more webinars moving forward where we will continue to address key issues for the pension fund system in the region. And remember that the PLAC network is for you. Make use of it so that we can all together strengthen pension fund systems. Thank you for your participation. We had at some point 250 people connected today. Thank you for your questions and for your commitment to strengthen social security institutions. Have an excellent rest of the day. And again, thank you, Edgar, for sharing your knowledge with all of us.
Muchas gracias por acompañarnos.
Thank you. Thank you for being here with us today.